we welcome you to this afternoon's virtual program. We are pleased that you've chosen to spend a portion of your lovely day with us to explore some of the history of Middlesex County that has been previously unknown to many of us. During this difficult pandemic year, we found new and different ways to provide you with program content relative to the rich 352-year history of Middlesex County. To this end, we have begun a series of virtual programs. In fact, this is the fourth such program. Also, we've expanded the museum's website as well as the content that we contribute to the Museums of Middlesex website. MOM, as it's called, is a collaboration among 4 Middlesex County institutions: the Urbanna Museum, the Deltaville Maritime Museum, the Colonial Seaport Foundation, and the Middlesex Museum. Today's topic, Tangier Islanders in Urbanna, is a fascinating topic and one that we are so pleased to be able to spotlight. We also have a number of other projects in progress that will allow you to experience our museum's offerings virtually. You will find the URL for our museum website as well as for the MOM website in the chat. You're also invited to follow us on Facebook, and that's the Middlesex Museum and Historical Society on Facebook. If you would like to receive notification of upcoming programs that we're doing, please place your name and email address or other information in the chat during this program, or you can sign up on our website or call us and indicate that you want to be notified of our programs. And we invite you to support the museum's programs through your tax-deductible contributions. You may donate through the link on the museum's website, which is middlesexmuseum.com, or mail your contributions through postal mail to Middlesex Museum, P.O. Box 121, Saluda, Virginia 23149. And both the museum URL for the website and the postal address can be found in the chat. Before we go on to the business of this afternoon, we want to acknowledge that this has been a difficult year for the Middlesex Museum as we mourn the loss of 3 of our board members: our treasurer, Diane Gravitt, board members, Betsy Bristow and Jean Rain. We want to take a moment to acknowledge them and to pay tribute. We're thankful for their lives, and we're thankful for their contributions to the Middlesex Museum and to the larger community. We extend our sincerest condolences to their families during this very difficult time. We will not forget Diane, Betsy, and Jean. And now I'd like to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Robert Pritchard, who is a member of the board of the Middlesex Museum and a member of the executive committee. He will be our moderator for today. Dr. Pritchard.
Thank you very much, Placido White. Our presentation today is going to be divided into 3 parts. We will begin with an introduction from Larry Tuning, who will talk about
Should
the
you
events.
be able to see him?
Excuse me? If you look in your upper right-hand corner where it says view, you have 2 choices. One is speaker view and one is gallery view. So if you go to speaker view, you get a more than you need picture of the person who is speaking. If you go to gallery view, it looks like the Brady Bunch looked like back in, and you see lots of boxes with lots of people. So you can choose, and because there are lots of us, which is wonderful, the gallery view actually takes up 3 pages. So if you want to see who is interesting and who else is looking, if you go to the center of the screen, right or left, you'll have an arrow which will let you go on to other pages and see who else is watching. But we will have today an introduction from Larry Tuning, and that will then be followed by a set of recollections from 2 people who were children at the time they came in 1933 to Urbanna. And those are recorded statements by Catherine Payne Walton Vi and by Carl Dyes. And they will share their recollections. They are no longer with us, but they recorded late in their lives their reflections of that experience. So that's kind of the second part. Third part will be a discussion, beginning with a discussion of those who were the children of immigrants from Tangier Island, who left Tangier Island and came to Urbanna. And at the end of that, we'll then open discussion for anybody who's here to make a contribution or to ask a question or otherwise contribute to what we've said. I would suggest that during the presentation, before we get to the questions, if you're not speaking, it's a good idea to keep your screen on mute, because the accumulated sounds and backgrounds of everybody with a microphone makes it very difficult actually to hear the primary speaker. So we begin. We're very fortunate to have Larry Tuning speak to us. He is a local journalist, historian, and author. And I understand that his first book, published back in 1983, was a book about Tangier Island. And he has continued to be interested and to write for local papers about Tangier Islanders and the role they've played in Middlesex County. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Larry Tuning.
Thank you. The August storm of 1933 hit the North Carolina coast on August 23, packing 90-mile-an-hour winds. And soon after, the eye crossed over the Virginia state line near the mouth of the bay, produced a 100-year flood from storm surge greater than any recorded since the storm of 1821. At some places on the bay, the flood surge was 9.5 feet over mean low water. The damage inflicted to the mid-Atlantic and portions of New England amounted to $41 million, with $35 million of that occurring in Virginia and Maryland. When it hit Tangier Island, the flood surge reached the second floors of most folks' homes. Those who could gathered their belongings, along with hogs, chickens, whatever else they could find, and rushed up to the second floors of their homes. After the storm, if it wasn't enough for the islanders to have to deal with all the damage to their belongings, which included first and foremost tracking down their boats that broke loose from the moorings and drifted away, they had to quickly corral the numerous coffins of their family members that had been exhumed by the floodwaters floating out into the bay. When the storm came, our nation was in the middle of the Great Depression. Much of what was destroyed in this storm, not just on the island, but up and down the eastern and western shores of the Chesapeake Bay, was not insured. And so many families had to live with what they could fix themselves. There was no federal aid. There was no FEMA authorities pouring in from Washington, D.C. to help anybody. Most everybody was on their own. In 1933, the town of Urbanna was weathering the Great Depression. And its high banks along its shoreline, for the most part, helped us to weather the 100-year flood from the August storm. Before the storm, the town already had a group of Tangier folks living in town who left the island in the 1920s to make Urbanna, as they called it, their home. The fact Tangier families were already here in part encouraged the migration of 14 families to move to town right after the storm. The families here provided what beds they had for the refugees. When they ran out of beds, they had floor space provided to lay one's head. Why did they come to Urbanna? For generations, Tangier Island watermen had been arriving at the end of each September to be a part of the opening of the state of Virginia's public oyster hand tong season on October 1. Josh Holmes told me on that particular day, some called it the day the bank opened, while others called it the day the smokehouse door opened. It was the day cash money, real money, began to flow again throughout the region. Hog House Bar and Balls Point oyster bars and other fertile oyster grounds near town provided winter work for hundreds of oystermen. In the 1920s, the town had a couple of large shucking houses and several small ones, which provided a steady market during the oyster season. And there were oyster buy boats coming from all over the bay to buy oysters. The men of Tangier have been coming to town for years, sleeping 3 and 4 in small upstairs rooms rented over top of Curtis Haywood's store. Store building is here on Wadling Street and still standing today. Some Tangiermen wintered on their boats. Some stayed with relatives. And most ventured home on Thanksgiving, coming back and working until Christmas, going home for Christmas, then coming back to Urbanna to work until the oyster season ended. They came with the hope they'd catch enough oysters to financially fund their families' households through the winter and enough money to provide a fine Thanksgiving and Christmas celebration. On good years, they went home at Christmas with enough firewood loaded in the boats to burn until spring. Several live turkeys with ropes around their legs tied to a hole drilled in a gunnel that was specifically for that purpose. Bags full of oranges, nuts, hard candy for Christmas stockings. And if they had a good year, a few presents purchased from Robert S. Bristol's store. On bad years, and there were bad years, presents likely came from Curtis Haywood's store on Wadling Street. Let's face it, R.S. Bristol on the corner of Virginia and Cross Street was the mill and roads of Urbanna, and prices reflected that. Mr. Haywood did not have the selection, but he was invested in the Tangier waterman with his room renting. If money was tight, he'd give you tick, also known as credit, providing you left your 10-gauge fowling piece or something else he knew you had to get back soon for collateral. Elmer Crockett told me in an interview in the mid-1970s, he left his fowling piece with Mr. Haywood for 2 oyster seasons before he had the money to get it back. When he came back with the money, Mr. Haywood pulled it from under the counter, right where he put it, the day Mr. Crockett had given it to him. When you really get down, if it was real close to Christmas, you could always go to the corner of Prince George and Cross Streets to Lucius Franklin Harper's store. You've heard the saying, a good businessman doesn't usually have a big heart. Well, Mr. Harper suffered from having a big heart. And on occasion, children from Tangier and white and black children throughout this area received gifts on Christmas Day of the generosity of Mr. Harper and the faith that he had that he would be paid back in some manner. And in most cases, he always was. You can argue he was most likely giving away old inventory he couldn't sell anyway, but he was aware of who had a need and answered that need wherever he could. Long before the August storm in 1933, people of Tangier Island knew the town of Urbanna well, and that it was a town with a deep water harbor, high shoreline banks, situated near fertile oyster and crab grounds, and all the bells and whistles: a drugstore, hardware stores, grocery stores, 5 and 10 cent store, a big brick, well-maintained school, a church, all within walking distance, and all adding to the quality of life. So when those 14 families chose to come to Urbanna, they had plenty of knowledge of what they were coming to. There was another element. The town had, not in abundance, but it did have some affordable housing on Taylor Avenue, was left over from an unsuccessful business venture in the town going back to 1902. The Urbanna manufacturing plant came to Urbanna to manufacture work shirts and work overalls. They built a large brick plant that was located today on what is in Queen Anne's Cove's condo property. To support the business, the company needed to provide housing for supervisors and specialty workers from the city. The firm built a row of 2-story houses on the north side of Taylor Avenue, which they referred to as cottages. It became known as Cottage Row. And after the plant closed around 1910, these houses became available for sale and provide affordable houses for several families from Tangier after the August storm. Everything I talked about was in walking distance inside town. Most all Tangier folks owned a boat of some type, sometimes several boats, but they did not always in the beginning own cars. That time period from the 1920s to the 1960s, when we had Tangier families moving to Urbanna, was a bright period in our history. The Tangier families brought diversity to our community. They brought with them the knowledge and talent to expand the town's seafood industry by becoming the main harvesters and shedders of soft-shell crabs. They were water smart, innovative, and came from a hard-working culture. The knowledge of working the water led to economic growth in the 1920s through today, tied to the crab fishery. They brought a spiritual rebirth to our community. The Baptist faith dominated this area for generations and had grown to be somewhat, well, let's just say, set in their ways. Tangier Island folk were all die-hard Methodists. This helped to foster a mini religious awakening as Tangier's faithful children of God found a spiritual home at Urbanna Methodist Church South, known today as the Urbanna United Methodist Church, and also in the Pilgrim Holiness Church, known today as Remlick Wesleyan Church in Remlick. Today, over 100 years since Tangier folks started moving to Urbanna to live, second, third, and fourth generations living here today go home to the island once a year to the Tangier Island Homecoming to celebrate their heritage and roots. Whenever I go to Tangier and I see Jerry Pruitt or Milton Parks or others there, they always ask me how's Jonesy Payne or Thomas Lee, Donnie and Tony Walton, or Richard and Larry and Lance Shores are doing. They know I'm from Urbanna, and that connection to Tangier Island has opened doors to many friendships for me. In 1983, my first book, Barkhead Skipper, Tales of a Tangier Island Waterman, Stories from Elmer Crockett, was published, and in that volume, there's a story entitled The August Storm. If you want to feel the impact of that storm at that moment it hit you, you need to read that chapter. Mr. Crockett was not on Tangier at the time, but he was on the Northern Neck, buying and catching crabs for his brother's crab house on Tangier. He moved to Urbanna in 1966 for life, long after the August storm. I appreciate that the Middlesex County Museum is focusing on this topic. The August storm was a bad thing at the time, but it ended up a good thing for the people of Urbanna and Middlesex County. And I hope those of you with Tangier Island blood running through your veins today who call Urbanna and Middlesex County your home feel the same way. I know it was a good thing and a blessing for us. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this program. That's it.
Thank you, Larry. At the end of the presentation, there'll be a chance for people to ask questions of Larry and others. But if you'd like to raise any questions now, you can use the chat function if you're on a computer. The bottom of the screen has got in the center a little feature for chat. It allows you to address the question directly to him or to anyone, and we can save those up. But anyway, if some questions come to mind right now, you can pose that already. I now like to ask Whitney Walton Law to post some of the two clips that we have, one of which she was responsible for collecting. She has film clips both from Carl Dyes and from her grandmother, Catherine Payne Walton Vi.
Yes, I do remember the storm. I do remember the storm because Grandma carried me from where we lived to another house that was taller off the ground.
Mm-hmm. And
Boats, big boats were going right by the homes. The water started coming up, and that's when Grandma got Melvin and I, and Ed. Ed was the baby, though. And she took us to the house 3 doors down from where we were living, and that's higher off the ground. And Melvin and I, like I say, Ed was too small then. Melvin and I sat on the steps to watch the tide come up. And every time it come up a step, we'd go up another step. And we did that for about 5 steps before it started receding back down. And when we went in the house, it was snakes under the stove, because everything, you know, the walls went right into the homes. Don't remember
You don't remember that?
when we exactly moved. I remember when we got off the boat here. I don't know how long, because we went back to the house and we lived in it. But it wasn't long after that. See, Grandpa and Daddy were already down here working. They used to come down here and work, the oyster and all, because it was good. So then, I forget. My mind's not too good. My memory's not too good. But anyway, they were down here when all that happened. And then they did come back home after the storm and just got us all ready in a boat. And Grandpa had found a house for rent, and right there where Beatrice is living now. And we got on that boat and came down here. I moved to this house after Thomas and I got married. First, when we first got married, we lived with Daddy. I stayed and I kept house for Daddy. So the other children stayed with Grandma, which was right next door, where Beatrice lives now.
Right.
And they'd come over my house to see what we had for supper, and if they liked what we had, then they'd eat with us. That's how they did. If they didn't like what Grandma had, some of them would say, "Well, I'm going over Sissy's, see what she's got," you know. So that's how that went. It was rough.
Yeah.
It was rough. But I never remember going hungry. We always had food because Grandpa and Daddy used to go duck hunting. We'd have duck, and Grandma would always have chickens. Go out there and get 2 chickens and fix them up and fry them. We ate good. You know, it's not that we ever went hungry. We had pigs down the back. Grandma had her chickens. She loved her chickens. Had fresh eggs. So we never wanted for food.
Why did the women do it rather than the men?
Well, we had no men that wanted to do it. They had their own jobs. And they weren't going to stop their jobs just to piddle like we were doing.
Right. Y'all started out doing the crabbing and all that stuff too?
Beatrice herself. I never went crabbing. Beatrice used to pull the pots. I'd stay on the shore, take care of the crab house and all the other stuff. And she would go crabbing, bring the crabs in, put them in the floats. Then we had the floats outside. And that's just the way we did it. Not to help us, no. They'd go crab and sell us their peelers. Yeah, but no, we never had any help. We did it ourselves. We sure did. Dancing. Daddy used to have to make me stop. I didn't weigh but 98 pounds. Loved to do the jitterbug.
Jitterbug.
Oh yeah, that was going one end, the jitterbug. And we had guys that come from uh, come into town. They were good dancers too. I tell you, we had a ball.
It was.
We're at skating rink. When they're not skating, you can dance.
Okay.
Use it for the dancing. But then when the skating starts, then you can't dance. You have to skate. We had a little place where you go to get your ice cream and all, a little cubby hole. And everybody used to get in there and dance as much as they could. That's where Daddy caught me and told me he had to stop. I had to stop me. He says, you ain't gonna be, let me see what he said now. He says, you're skinny enough now. He says, you're gonna wither away to nothing. But we had a good time. We did. Yeah. Always been a believer. I spend my time with God every day. That's the first thing I do when I get out of the bed. That I do.
I had to put the last part in, Larry, because I feel like that talks about that awakening that you were referring to too. They're just a religious group of people, and it was just so amazing how much they believe. And let me pull up Carl's though here.
Glad you did.
Yeah.
My name is Carl Melvin Dawes. I was born on Tangier Island in 1921, June the 17th, 1921. And living on Tangier wasn't easy. You had to work most of the time or you would not live. So, and in the fall, when my dad was a waterman, he worked the river, the Potomac River. He worked Rappahannock, the James River, and that's the way it was. And before he could leave in the fall to go to work, because he would not come back home until Christmas, he'd leave 1st of October and would come back to the Tangier Christmas time. And then they'd stay about after New Year's, and they'd go back and leave and come back in about March, sometime in March. And that's how it was on there. And we grew up on there having had nice schools, very good schools. And I enjoyed going. I don't know why, but I did. And so I grew up on the island. And my dad came down here in 1933. They came here to look for a place to live, but they never said anything to me about it. What they said, they were coming to Urbanna to put the boat on the railway, and my mother was going with them. So that's all I knew. So they came down here and they found a place. It's gone now. It's not in Urbanna anymore. Another house is built in the place of it. You'd never know there was another house there. And so they came here, and before we came here, we had the thing called the August Dawn. I was working with my dad, crabbing, of course, on the western shore here. But that week, see, we'd come home every Saturday, and go back after 12 o'clock on Monday night. That's when we'd leave to come back across the bay. But this time I was sick. I had the stomach ache, and I never went. He left me here. So that's the time we had the August Dawn. It was the 22nd day of August, 1933, and I was left home that week. The storm came, and no one knew then that a storm was coming. It just came. Nobody knew about it. Some people were out in the bay. Some people were coming from Baltimore, coming to Tangier. So I think it was on a weekend. It was so bad that everything on Tangier was covered. The water was under my house, but it never came in it. It was built off the ground. And the tide was coming up, and I went. There was a graveyard in back of my house, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I could see the handles of the casket inside of the vault lid was sliding sideways, and the casket was raising the vault top up, and there was the water just poured in. And right in back of my house, my big tree in my yard fell over and bursted 3 of them. And you could look inside and see the clothes the man had on and all this. So this went on for nearly 2 days. And the boats in the creek were gone, lots of them. And one of the boats, I'll never forget her name, the Marion Sue Handy was her name. And she came right up in the street. That boat did. And the night came, and you could see Tangier a long ways out in the bay, from the bay, and because there were so many trees. When the storm was over, all you could see was the church steeple. That's about all was left. That's what you could see Tangier with. And you used to see way across the bay, you could see Tangier because of the trees. But after the storm, it was almost flat except for the church. At that time, you could only crab scrape with sail. You had to have sail. And when that sail went up, the engine was cut off. You could not use your engine. So that's the way it was for years until the August storm. The August storm changed that. The people had to have a living. So they let them use engines. And those people started crabbing with engine. Until this day, they're doing it with engine instead of sail, because everybody lost their sailboats. So that's the way it was. And then my mom, like I say, my mom and dad had been down here looking for a place, and they had a place to come. Well, this was August, and I remember just as well, it was yesterday. I came home from school, a recess. We all came home. We didn't stay in school to have lunch. We came home. And when I came home, my dad and mom says, get your, when you go back, we're leaving for Urbanna today. Get your report card and come back home, because we want to leave here as soon as we can. The boat was just about loaded. All we had to do is fill her up with gas. So that's what we did. And when we left Tangier to come across the bay, it was 1:30. I'll never forget it. It was 1:30 in the afternoon, and it was a beautiful evening. So we went across the bay, and when we got in the mouth of the Rappahannock River, it was the last day of September. The last day of September. So as the sun was going down in the west, we came into the Rappahannock. And we came in at what we call then was Westland Wharf. The old steamer used to come in there. So we anchored offshore, and Mom got dinner for us. And the next morning we got up, ate breakfast, and we looked, the boats were coming from all directions. It was the first day of oyster season, first day of October. And I bet when we got up close to about a mile or two from, I bet there was 300 boats of all kinds oystering in the Rappahannock River. I'll never forget that. And went into my new home. And I was pleased in one way and another way I wasn't. Because Tangier, I didn't know what a childhood was. I just didn't know because we had to work all the time. It was work from time I was 6 until I left. I was 11 years old when I left Tangier. And the first 2 weeks we were here, I never went to school. I oystered with 22-foot shafts, and I was only 11 years old. And I did it for 2 weeks to help my dad out. Then I went to school. And it's completely different from what I was used to on Tangier Island. But I finally got used to it, and when I did, man, I didn't want to go back to Tangier. And it was fantastic. I had when I came here, I said, Mama, we're going to have a Christmas tree for Christmas. Well, how do you know? I said, I'm going to get it. So at the end of the time, I paddled over to Rosegill and all kinds of trees over there. Then I saw one I wanted. I shouldn't say, but I did. Kid. So I went. Christmas time came, and I went on and I got my Christmas tree. That was the first Christmas tree I ever had in the house. So I got that one. So my dad knew a fellow by the name of Slaughter up there right in Moranico. He bought crabs over at Carter's Creek. He bought crabs over there, and my dad went up to see him because he wanted to see if he could find anybody to buy his crabs here. He would stay. And there was a bunch of them, good crabbers. And Mr. Slaughter told him, he said, if you can get enough crabbers down there, people to stay to sell crabs to, I'll send my boat down there and or come across from the river when he's going up and buy your crabs. But that's what he did. And then Mr. Hurley, Boyd Hurley here, he's found out what we were doing, selling up there when he could buy the crabs down here. So they knew about hard crabs, but they didn't know anything about peelers. Small crabs, they called them. But the peelers, we could tell you could take a fin, if you take a crab and look at the fin, you can tell just like that. If it's a green crab or a peeler or what, just by that fin. And so they thought we were just taking little crabs, and said we're going to catch all of them. But finally they learned that the crab had a sign. You follow that sign, you can tell when he's going to shed. So Mr. Hurley opened up a crab house down here, and one of the men from Tangier worked it for years until the old man died. Then he had Avery, Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne worked the crab house. He was very good at it. So all in all, I was beginning to love the place. And when the winter time came, like Dad had to come across here in his boat and get 3 loads to keep us through the winter. Well, down here, Mr. Cook, a fellow over here by Cook's Corner, he sold wood, and it was all cut. And he brought it here in my house, put it in the yard, all cut. I said, man, can't beat this. I got so lazy that winter I didn't even want to cut killing wood. But I really become this place here is heaven to me. And that's how I looked at Urbanna, is heaven. And I still do. I've been a lot of places, but I've nothing like home, Urbanna, nothing.
Whitney, thank you for collecting and showing those tapes, which are absolutely wonderful. We now have a chance to hear from the next generation or following generations of those who were part of that migration to Urbanna. We have with us Richard Shores, who was whose family lived next door to the Paynes. Is that right? Do I remember that correctly? And Thomas Walton and Lee Walton, and maybe even another generation of the Walton family, who can reflect as well on the experience. So I want to start with Richard, who is now a professor emeritus in mathematics from Lynchburg College, and is demonstrated in the last couple of weeks that he's still got Waterman in his blood. He's been putting out crab pots in order to collect crabs. And I wanted to start, if there's with a simple question: are there some stories you heard from your parents that agree with, disagree with what we've heard from Carl Dyes and Catherine Payne? I think you need to hit your unmute. It's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen.
Okay. I think we got it now.
So the question is, do you have some stories from your parents, recollections of that storm in 1933 or the early years in Urbanna?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
It's hard to follow the stars in this history. But our brother Dave wrote a book on Tangier, which I read some today, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And he could not be here. He is retired from Old Dominion University. But I knew all of these people. They were good friends. And Annette lived by Thomas Lee Walder. Of course, I'm a little older than Thomas Lee, but Catherine anyhow. But the Cottage Row was a great place to live. And they helped build Urbanna. They taught them about the seafood business. And it became well-to-do. Now, my brother Larry was born on Tangier Island.
Oh, David.
Excuse me. Yeah, excuse me, I got your names wrong. David, my older brother, was born on Tangier Island. And then they came here after the August storm. So he was a youngster when he came here. And I believe I was born in the Pickle House. They had some apartments there. And then we stayed in there, I guess, until we moved to the Cottage Row, which is a great place to be. David could not be here to talk on this, but he has some very interesting history of the island. My wife, Ida Mae, is from Fort Worth, Texas, and she has been here since we married. And because of people keeping me in school or passing me at the elementary and high school classes, I joined the Air Force. And then from there went on to get my degree from Randolph-Macon, a master's from the University of Mississippi in physics, a Bachelor of Arts and a PhD in mathematics from the University of Mississippi. But I believe that any success that I have had is because of the people that surrounded me during my young years. Thank you.
We also have a house full of Waltons. I wonder if Lee or Thomas, and you've got some.
Jones is here. He can't hear. Yeah.
You're on.
And Jonesy Payne, if you have any stories your parents told you about those early days in Urbanna, or the storm that moved people here.
What?
Do you have any stories? Do you have any stories about coming over?
No, I was born over here in 1934. First one born over here.
And
I'll say a little bit. I was born and raised in Urbanna, and I'm the oldest son of Catherine Walton, and grew up on the Cottage Road, lived next door to Richard. And I just remember living on the Cottage Road. Not only did your mom and dad raise you and your grandparents raise you, but the whole Cottage Road was settled with Tangier people, families, and they looked after you as if you were their son too. So we were raised by the whole community. And I think that has helped me a lot throughout my life. And I know that my aunt Beatrice was, I think, was the first one in the family to graduate from high school. And I happened to be the first one to graduate from college. And I came back and I actually coached and taught school in Middlesex County from 1970 to 1978. And the reason I quit coaching was because my grandfather passed away in 77. And I just felt I'd worked with him crabbing in the summers from about 12 years old on. And I got to the point where I felt like I needed to take up where he left off. So I went into the seafood business, and I now have Walton Seafood that I run with my son Lee there in Urbanna. So that's kind of my story. But I will tell one other story. My grandmother, we called her grandma, but she really wasn't related to it, but she raised my grandfather. And she had a husband, they called him Loving Henry. And it's a very good story that comes with his name. I was always wondered why they called him Loving Henry. I thought maybe it's because he was so kind. Well, come find out, the Tangier boy said that when he was courting my grandmother, he lived on Smith Island, which is about 6 miles away from Tangier. And every weekend, he would take a crab net and shove the boat, because it's pretty shallow between Smith Island and Tangier. He would shove the boat from Smith Island to Tangier to court her on the weekends. And then other Tangier boys would see him coming down the shoreline, and they would say, look, he said, he don't love her none. So they started calling him Loving Henry. So I thought that was a fascinating story. So I finally found out why they called him Loving Henry.
So,
I think the only thing I would probably add is Tangier has always been a close-knit community, and the people always, you know, they have a strong sense of what community is, looking out for each other. And, you know, I was young, but I do remember most of the older ones that came here from Tangier, and, you know, they took you in as though they, you know, raised you as one of their own, and several of them, you know, felt like grandparents to me. But I think that was an impact that they had on Urbanna and the local community, as well as the other communities that they settled in, Maradica, Reedville, Carter's Creek areas. They brought that close-knit sense to the community that was already established. And over time, you know, those traits carried into the community. And I think it still exists today.
But one other thing I gotta say, when we were coming up in young teenagers, we were pretty rough over on the cottage. And I remember Larry Tunin saying one time, his mom said, "Don't go there, bro, them boys on the cottage."
They stay off of Howard Street.
She told me to cut. I was going to Punky Taylor's house. She told me to cut through the orchard. Don't go on Cottage Road.
That's right. Up there.
Remember that orchard? That was a shortcut. Turned out to be the best friends I ever had, most of you.
You too.
Especially me.
Keyword.
I have helped them many a day with them books.
Hey, Nick.
So I wanted to ask also Larry Tuning if he wanted to add anything, having seen the two film clips and heard these gentlemen reflect a little bit on the close-knit community.
Well, I think they hit the nail on the head. They brought something very special to the community, the Tangier folks. Because a lot of them lived on Howard Street and on Cottage Row. And when I was growing up, well, I was a Baptist and they were all Methodists, so we didn't see one another till we got to school. And but really, where I really remember them was in high school. And that's when we got to playing football and basketball together. And a camaraderie comes out of that, but it was there early on too. All I remember about Thomas Lee Walton was that when I was a freshman in high school, he was a senior. And a guy named Gardy was the coach. You remember him, Thomas Lee?
Remember
Richard Gardy.
Anyway, he would get a couple of guys, Waverly Brooks and Thomas Lee were the seniors, and they were tough. And anyway, they would ask one of us to run through the line. And of course, none of us could get through the line because I weighed about 110 pounds soaking wet. But Thomas Lee taught me one thing about football. You got to be tough playing, I'll tell you that. And he was tough.
And but remember one thing, we had one leather helmet, the rest of them were fiberglass, and for some reason you got the leather helmet.
No.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, and the face mask.
That,
yeah, that was a helmet that didn't have a face mask. And so they had to put a face mask on.
Yeah. You see what happens, don't you?
I'll tell you this much.
I think another thing to add about community impact, you have Dr. Shores there. You know, he's been serving on the school board. My father was a teacher and he also served on the school board. I was elected and served on the school board in Middlesex County from 2008 to 2012. My sister is a teacher, been teaching for, I won't say how many years, but many years at Middlesex Elementary. And so, you know, again, it goes back to that strong sense of community and trying to give back, you know, where you can. Serving in fire departments, Jonesy, lifelong fire department member in Urbanna. So, you know, I just think that speaks to, you know, some of the impact that they've had on the Tangier family, not patting them on the back or anything, but, you know, there's a strong sense of that community and trying to thrive.
Was there a high school at any point on Tangier, or did people have to go to the mainland for high school? Do you know?
There were schools.
No, they still have a high school there.
Yes.
They continued
Yeah, they
high
still
school
got
there.
1 through 12 or 3 through whatever.
It's only several people in the class, the existing class now is just several people in the senior class. But they do try to present a thorough and good program.
Well, shall we invite others to join the conversation if they've got anybody who's participating to share a story or ask a question or make a comment? And they can direct questions to those who've already spoken. Or if that, so if anyone here would like to make a comment or raise a question or share an idea, you have to unmute yourself while you're talking, but ask your question, make your comment, and then we can, then when you finish, mute again so that other people will have a chance to talk as well.
Bob, this is Basaida. I just wanted to address this question to several of the speakers. I was truly delighted to learn that Beatrice Payne Taylor was the mayor of Urbanna. So as we talk about the impact of Tangier Islanders on Urbanna, then I was just delighted to hear that she was multiple terms as mayor of my hometown. And so I wondered if you all would talk about Beatrice a little bit. And then Whitney pointed out to me that she had a crabbing license, perhaps that other women didn't have. And so we'd love to hear about Beatrice.
I'll let Jonesy and Thomas Lee and Lee handle that question. But yeah, I was gonna throw out there as well that she was mayor, so that added to the community.
Go ahead.
Don't be shy now, Jones. Go ahead.
Come on, Jonesy.
Oh, I know she was mayor.
No.
She was the first female mayor.
There you go. Take over.
Yeah. And B, she just gave so much to our community and cared so much about our community. She was a great mayor, and the first female to be mayor of our town. I'm trying to think what she accomplished. I know she accomplished a great deal. I can't specifically think of it right now, but
I know the beautification project was one of her big, trying to get the street lights in town and, you know, redoing Main Street going through there and trying to raise money. Hopefully that'll continue on at some point.
Yeah,
but I know that was one of her big loves, was trying to create that for the town.
I'll add to the part though about the crabbing license. Catherine and Beatrice were two, I would say, of the only true working water women there for a while. Is that right, Lee? Would you say that?
Yeah.
In the Maritime Museum in Newport News, they did an exhibit on the two of them, as well as there's a few other women out there. I think Maryland and things like that, where they talked about how they were the only working water women. So I just think it's cool that, you know, two young women took over such a gritty business right there at Urbanna. So.
Well, I can tell a story about Beatrice. She was very frugal. She didn't waste anything. I think we got it from Grandma. Grandma would be out in the yard. She found the button or whatever. She would say, somebody's gonna need this one of these days. She had a whole thing full of buttons. But Beatrice was married to Dale Taylor, and he wanted some saltgrass for supper. And so Beatrice, she took home the littlest one she could find, but he wanted some big saltgrass. So he actually had to go across the river to Conrad and bought a dozen jumbo saltgrass. And brought home and told Beatrice to cook him saltgrass for his supper. And she said, Lord, no. She says, I'll cook you these little ones. I can sell them big ones, Dad. She always tries to figure out a way to make extra dollar.
Yeah.
I just like to say one other thing. I didn't know Jonesy was going to be on here, but we've been friends for years. And anything I achieved, he was always happy for me too. And when I come here to run for the school board, he was for me. But Jones and I have been friends from almost day one.
Yeah. We're pretty close, same age.
The other thing about B, I mean, the town of Urbanna has been incorporated since 1902. And she was the first mayor and first female mayor. And I think it's great that her heritage was tied to Tangier Island and Urbanna. I think B was born in Urbanna, wasn't she, Jonesy? Was she the youngest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But she had that Tangier heritage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if I may say something there, it's like a homecoming to come back to Urbana through this video presentation. And if you didn't know me, you knew my dad, who ran the 5 and 10. Anyhow, a lot of people use either work for my father, like Edith, or you certainly did business with my dad. Anyhow, I came back with my dad when he left Capron, Virginia, where he had left the drugstore in Urbanna, and I opened that store up in Capron. He worked it for 10 years, and then he came back to Urbanna to open the 5 and 10. But one thing that just I've laughed about it ever since I heard it. My mom was from Southampton County, and my dad was from Middlesex County, that I knew. And I would go back and forth, and the quickest way was to go across the Jamestown Ferry. But one day I was headed towards Williamsburg, and as I pulled over to the ferry, I saw this worker on the ferry, and I said, "Hello." And in very unmistakable brogue, he said, "Hello." He just said it, and with the Tangier brogue. And I said, I got to talk to him. So since he was the worker, he had about 10 or 15 minutes to chat. And so I saw him afterwards, and I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "West Virginia." And I said, "Really?" I think, well, let me start all over again. He says, "Where's your daddy from?" He said, "Tangier Island." I said, "Well, now, how did you get over to West Virginia?" He said, "Well, when the storm hit in 1933, he said, I am never going to let this happen again." So he started moving west. Most people stopped in Urbanna, where a number of us grew up. But he took his family and he got it to the mountains of West Virginia, and there he was. Now, this was 20 years ago that I had this conversation, maybe a little bit more, but it's been a ways. And anyhow, I guess this worker from Tangier Island and then West Virginia, but he had too much salt water in his veins, so he came back to work this time on the James River on the ferry boat. Well, that was a very, very nice. You always had a relationship there, and I found out that growing up and looking back to Urbanna, there were some good things and some bad things about being from Urbanna or in Urbanna. Well, the bad things is that everybody knew what you were doing, and the good things were everybody knew what you were doing, and so you take your pick. And it's a real homecoming. I do appreciate seeing people that I recognize here, and I've been keeping in touch with Urbanna, going back to our class reunions with 53 through Anita South, and then she died, and I haven't been back since the beginning of the pandemic. But it's always been a pleasure to go back and get a soft crab sandwich.
Thank you. Are there other recollections that people would like to share?
Okay, now.
Hi, I'm Bob Montague, and I've been a next door neighbor of Kane's Crab House ever since it came into existence. And I always enjoyed that relationship. It was a great place for us to go and get fresh crab meat or crab products that we would enjoy eating very much at our house there at Sandwich. My wife always enjoyed the crab meat because it generally didn't have any shells in it, and it was easy for her to cook. And they were a symbol of Urbanna, really. They carried on the tradition of Urbanna as a seafood town. That really, for me, began with early operation that preceded them there on the waterfront in Urbanna. And we had a really much more cordial relationship with Kane's Crab House than we actually did with the Hurleys, because they were always friendly and cooperative and easy to get along with. Mr. Hurley was somewhat otherwise. During World War II, he took advantage of my grandmother, who was a widow, unable to look after things properly while my father was off fighting the Jap. And when he came home, he discovered that they had been trespassing on our property, putting oyster shells in some old houses that we had for servants to live in down on the waterfront at one time next door to Kane's Crab House, that subsequently had to be torn down because they were basically ruined by what Mr. Hurley did to them when my grandmother was not in a position to look after her property, like might have when she was younger and when my father was around to reassure her. We always loved the ladies at Kane's Crab House, and that was really a big part of what Urbanna was all about, because it really is a seaport and seafood town. And that was how it maintained that reputation with Kane's Crab House. It was an Urbanna institution. And I'm really glad to see Charles Richardson here today. I haven't seen him in a long time. And that is very gratifying for me too. So really good to have you with us today.
Nice to be here, Bob. Good to see you too.
Charles sold me a painting of the building where I practiced law in Urbanna after his family sold at home in Urbanna, I guess it was, that now hangs in my home there at Sandwich, showing the house at 290 Virginia Street, which was in his family at one time. And it shows the house as it looked when I was young and it was a residence. We have now owned that house for 45 years, and it's been a commercial use ever since I bought it. But I can remember it when I guess it was one of your relatives lived in it.
Yes, it was my mother-in-law that had the house when my grandfather married her, and I lived in that house, and that's where my family was raised.
Yeah, well, my daughter owns that house now, and it has recently been rented to a very nice wine and cheese shop, and it seems to be thriving. Urbanna is starting to sort of revive after COVID and what have you, and that seems to be one of the things that is symbolic of the revival of Urbanna after COVID. If you get thirsty for a bit of wine or a bite of cheese, stop by and give it a try. If you're in Urbanna, Charles, you would enjoy seeing what they're doing with the house now.
Well, you never know when I might pop in there for that, but I'll be looking for people that I know also, and it's good to see you too, right there, and Richard as well, and Ann Dunoff also.
Bob, one thing that I might mention in regards to that time period in the 30s and the 20s and 40s and 50s was that not only did Tangier come to Urbanna, but we had a number of families that came from Guinea Neck and places like that, Matthews. Some of you remember Woodland Row, Margaret Barrett, Susie Rowe. That family also lived on Cottage Road, and they were from Guinea. But the oyster industry was just amazing. It brought a lot of people to the area, from October till when it ended. But what it really did was it helped us. It brought permanent residents to Urbanna, and that was very important to our community, and was a positive thing.
My family, when it came to Middlesex County, had a farm near Waterview when it was my great-grandparents' generation. And they didn't start living in Urbanna until 1934. But that was before I was born, so I have known Urbanna all my life. And they were, to some extent, come here like the Tangier people, but for different reasons. My family were wiped out financially by Reconstruction. They lost what had been an 800-acre farm to Reconstruction and were poor for quite a while. And eventually were able to buy families in 1934 and become what became the next door neighbor of Payne's Crab House. And I'm really glad to say that we're still there. I'm really sorry that Payne's Crab House isn't still there, frankly, because I thought it was a very important feature of the Urbanna waterfront and the life of the town, and a symbol of the fact that it was a town of the Rappahannock River and what it took to be put on people's faces.
One thing, if I may say something else about the two sisters that ran the crab house, Saturday was the time to do business. And when I would come into town on Wednesday, I would ask them if they could fix me some steamed crabs. And they said, absolutely. How many do you want? And it didn't matter what time of the week it was. They always were there to make sure that they gave every customer the best service they could possibly come up with. And I think that was widespread.
And Mr. Richardson, your mother, I think your mother was my Sunday school teacher. Did she teach Sunday school?
She loves it.
Yeah, she did for 33 years.
Yeah, she was my Sunday school teacher.
And there's some wonderful friends that we met at the Methodist Church through that relationship. Yes.
And I don't know if you know it or not, but the Five and Dime store, Richard Shore's mother worked there. She was an employee of yours. I don't know if you remember that.
That was Edith Shore's, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Miss Shores was a Hawkeye, I'll tell you that. I used to go into the 5 and 10 cent store, and I think Mr. Richardson, Charles, I don't know whether it's true or not, but he must have had a lot of shoplifting from time to time. So every kid that would go to the toy section, Miss Shores would be over there watching us closely.
He was a good employee, but there's one thing that maybe you do not know. But when Dad died in 1984, he finally sold the business, and there was 5 gals that ran the business. Clarence Brown was the head clerk, and there were 5 ladies that ran that store. Every one of them was at least 70 years old, doing a great job. That's what we turned the store over to, the lady there. But the small bit in Franklin stores, as so many of those stores were on the way out anyhow. So things happen in that case for the best. And Larry, you got some great books. I'm reading them and I love them. Thank you for doing that.
I'll tell you something else about Richard's mother. She can make the best deviled crabs of anybody I know.
Just one story from a friend about the importance of oysters in Middlesex County. I had a friend whose name was David Naff, but people called him Buddy. And one day he told me that his first job after college was teaching in Middlesex County. And so I asked him, what was it like to teach in Middlesex County? And he said, well, I only taught 1 year because the year they hired me, the oysters didn't come in and nobody got paid. And so the whole community suffered when the oysters were bad. And he then went to the Shenandoah Valley and became a school teacher and a principal, and then later Episcopal minister as his life went on. But he said what they did was that they sort of farmed out the new teachers who couldn't get along without a salary, and somebody let him board in their house, and then the county later paid them back. But at least to Christmas, nobody got, none of the new teachers at least got any salary for teaching in Middlesex County. So I guess when there were no oysters, everybody suffered, and not just the watermen.
You can still get a very good, I think you can, a good soft shell crab sandwich, and that's the best I've ever eaten. I've eaten several places, but she still runs a good restaurant, and I love eating there when I go. And bread pudding's not bad either.
Are there other contributions or questions? Does somebody want to talk about accents or anything else? I think we Charlie has a reference to Tangierman and ways of speaking.
I'd like to ask Thomas Lee. Thomas Lee, didn't Southern Living have a write-up on time about your mother and Beatrice?
Did who?
Southern Living, the magazine Southern Living.
Oh, yeah, they did. Yeah, they had a write-up about, I think the write-up was about them being the only two females that had crabbing license in Virginia. Was it?
Let me say this, Bill Pruitt was commissioner down in Newport News, and he said, the governor said, Bill, do you know any women that work on the water? He said, I got the very two you want.
And Bill Pruitt, he was commissioner of fisheries, and he was from Tangier.
Yeah, he said, I got.
But what are you talking about accent? I thought everybody talked.
Whitney told me something. She said that, and you gave an example when you were talking, that sometimes in Tangier people say the negative what they mean.
Mhm.
He doesn't like that girl much. Maybe
Yeah,
he liked her a whole lot.
Yeah, a lot of back.
I didn't find it until about a year ago that it wasn't such a word as dream. I thought dream. I remember my grandfather, when we'd go to copper the boat, we'd paint the washboard and stuff first white, then we turn it upside down and we'd copper the bottom. And he always tell me, don't let that copper dream down into the white. So I always thought that was the word, but man, there's no such word as dream.
Unless you do that. Unless you do that.
But I still don't mean by accent.
I think we may.
Dr. Shores can speak more to that. His brother Richard, David, really went into the dialect in his book, because everybody wants to say it's a Elizabethan accent, and it's really not. It's just a strong regional dialect from being isolated for so many years, but it sounds a lot like the old English, Cornwallian English, and so people think that's the origin of it, but that's not really not.
I think it's a kind of mistake to say that there was an Elizabethan accent, because in fact, England in the 16th century had about 50 or 60 very distinct accents. And one of the things I think in the 1930s, there was a study
Put your hand up. Huh?
by the Roosevelt administration on accents. And one of the things that I found interesting was they said that people in Virginia in that point all tended to say fork, your knife and fork. People in Maryland said fork. And I think some people in Tangier said fark. Some people in the Bay, Smith Island and Tangier, were talking about fark.
There's David there. He can tell you the accent.
Say it.
Hello, Dave.
There you go.
I was gonna say, I think we got a couple in here with some accents. Go ahead, David.
David, say something. If you read my book.
Oh, if you read my book, you'll find out something about Tangier.
And the accent.
And the accent. And many other things.
You know, hey, this is Jeff Payne. I'm Jones's son. One thing is they were very protective of that accent. And I'll never forget, Daddy and I were on the mailboat going to the island. And this couple turned around and said, "This is the first time I've been outside the United States." I'm not gonna repeat what Daddy said, but he wasn't very happy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can remember being on Tangier with Nano Catherine. And I don't know, I had a way that I could always speak the dialect, and I would try to fall into it, act like I was from Tangier. And she said, "Don't you dare do that around there." She says, "They think you're making fun. You better not do it." So I learned not to do it around anybody from Tangier.
I was
Everybody
born
I
in-
knew had the dialect, and it just sounded natural to me.
And when you
I
get
was
around
born-
the norm, it starts right over. It's not as bad, but
Dave,
Yeah,
Bob,
I was
may
born
say
in
something.
Tangier, but grew up in Urbanna. That was after the August storm.
keep talking.
Dave,
I don't think they can
how
hear
about
me.
commenting on speaking negative
That's
and
good.
backwards?
What?
Speaking backwards.
You just commented how Tangiermans sometimes talk backwards.
Tell me how. Show me.
Well, you say, she ain't,
You get
Well,
around.
you would say,
speak
she ain't pretty,
differently.
meaning she was pretty.
Yeah.
You what?
She was pretty.
Who?
That's what they said.
She ain't pretty none, which meant she was
I've
pretty.
heard that. I've heard
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, I've read that today in your book.
Yeah. Or if somebody's cooking something that smells good, you say, "That
Okay.
smells bad.
Poor or something.
That's poor smelling." That means it's good.
No, they'll say, "Boy, that was bad." And then, yeah, that's what they mean.
Yeah.
I think they call that talking over the left.
Over the left.
Yes. Over there.
David, do you remember when you came to Urbanna?
Do you remember when you came to Urbanna?
Well, I was born in 33, 33. I don't remember just coming there,
Yeah.
but I remember going back to Tangier a lot.
Yes. You came the year of the storm.
That's right, the August storm.
And then Tangier are famous for giving you a nickname. I remember when I would go there, sometimes they had a man named Duck Egg, they had a man named Popcorn, they had one named Fireboat. And my grandpa, I was having dinner with him one night, and he sat there, and it was cold that day. He said, "I remember the coldest day I spent." He said, "Me and Puss was over in the duck blind." I said, "Who?" He said, "Puss." And he got laughing. So that was the nickname, Puss. I figured he must have a lot of pimples or something.
But they also had a lot of unusual names for people they didn't like.
Bob, if I may say so, thank you very much for the help that you got, that you gave me to get on this Zoom meeting today. I appreciate that, Miss Basita. It's good to have met you. Y'all run a great museum. I've been there. Into the museum is really a special place. And I got the contact here, I believe, from Billy Van Aim, who's living in Richmond area. I mean, in the Roanoke area. And I think he sent me the connection to get this going. It's good to see you guys. It really is. David,
It's great.
A lot of memories, don't we? And Richard, you know, your family, and it was just a very, very special thing, and it still is. And I don't think that if you're around and you've seen the last of me yet, I've got to get my driver's license renewed every time I go more than 5 miles away. I've got to get a special driver's license for my wife. No,
Well, that may be, this is almost too much fun to stop, but I guess people are going to be fixing their dinners and have some other things working for tonight. So I want to thank everybody for participating. This has just been gorgeous. To
Okay,
have,
can we talk again?
Yes, it seems. Let me tell you that the Middlesex County Museum and Historical Society is trying to have a presentation about every 2 months that is online. Our next presentation will be in July. We're hoping at that time that we may be hearing from Carrie Lattimore, who is a professor of African American Studies at Trinity College in San Antonio, Texas, and is from Middlesex. And so we're talking with him about the possibility of presentation, but we will continue to give people an occasion to talk about Middlesex County history. And I want to thank everybody who has participated. We have also we're going to have a presentation. We're hoping to have a presentation in September, which will be an opportunity for those who want in person to visit Locust Grove Farm, which is one of the older farms in Middlesex County. And if you look on the website for the museum under upcoming events, you can see some conversation about that location. And if you're a waterman, you may know that there's a piece of undeveloped waterfront between Meacham and Whiting Creek, where Temple Bank is. Anyway, that's where Locust Grove Farm is, and we hope to do that in September. So we've got other events coming. I want to thank Whitney Malall, particularly for her technical assistance, and all of our panelists and speakers for the contributions they've made today. Thank you all.
Well, I look forward to that.
Yes, I do too.
I would like to contribute one concluding remark. Not only have Tangiermen come to Urbanna, but I have been to Tangier, both in my light airplane on the airfield there, also by sailboat and motorboat to eat at, I think it's called Mr. Crockett's Restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
We find out about Tangier when we're from Urbanna, as well as we're finding out about Urbanna when we're from Tangier.
Now, one
being part of this program today.
One question, if I may, is Mrs. Crockett's crab house still open now?
I really don't know.
Yeah, but I know Carl Dyes was going to give us another tour there. He was our tour guide over here with my mom and dad. And it's
yeah. Well, Carl lived very close to us in Urbana, but
Hey, no, no, no. Get off there. No. No, she's talking about the dog. No.
No. What?
I think it's somebody's cat or dog jumping someplace she's not to be, huh? Lee, did you know about whether Crockett's restaurant is open? I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, Hilda's is not open now. It's 2 other restaurants that are currently open, but Miss Crockett's, Miss Hilda's is Chesapeake House is what it's called. Yeah, Jones likes to tell me what to tell y'all.
Where is this coming? Fisherman's Corner, 2 still left open. The Fisherman's Corner, they're across the street from each other.
Did y'all see a couple winters ago when they had all that ice over at Tangier? You know, they got a cross there where you come into the channel and that was froze over, had about 6 inches of ice on it. And that Tangierman was right there. He said, this ice ain't as cold as most ice. He said, this is the global warming ice. I got a kick out of that.
Something? May I? Hello?
Hello?
There you go. Now you're back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I am not originally from Urbanna, the town of Urbanna, but I have been touched by these families more than one time, many times through my life here.
You mean the Tangier families?
Pardon?
That's right. You mean the Tangier families?
Oh,
Ray
yes.
Rogers.
Carl Dyes and his wife were friends
Yeah.
with my parents, and they went camping together right often.
Yeah.
And I worked with Thomas Lee's mother in the drugstore back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the slang that they had.
Yeah.
Catherine was a black-haired beauty. She had deep blue eyes. I remember back then. And we
Yeah.
worked lunch counter. And we had a new employee there that came in, and Catherine and I were working there with her that day. And she didn't really want to do a whole lot, I don't think, this new employee. But anyway, she came to us and quietly whispered, she says, "How many cherries do you have to squeeze to make a cherry smash?" Of course, we knew it was all syrup. And so we explained the whole thing to her. And then when she turned around and left, Catherine looked at me, and those blue eyes got real big, and she said, "Jiminy Dast." And that was a Tangier expression that I heard. I've heard Thomas Lee use it before.
Jiminy Dast.
It means it's an expression. Do you
Well,
believe
you know,
that?
on Tangier, they think that we're all kin together.
I went to school with two of Thomas Lee's brothers, and I went to school with Larry Tunin. And Larry Tunin and I have been good friends for a long time. He's one of my best friends. And
Was that Larry Tuning?
Larry Tunin, yes.
From Urbanna.
Yes, I live in
Yeah.
Urbanna.
Yeah.
I've lived here since the 60s.
Yeah.
And
I've been there. Well,
he used to tease me about being a come here.
Oh, yeah.
So after some years of this, I finally said, well, at least my children won't be come here. And he kind of looked at me and he says, "Excuse me, Ray, you have to be here at least 3 generations before you're not a come here anymore."
I don't think I said that.
Yes, you do. You did. Let's see, Thomas Lee. Thomas Lee had a baseball team back in the early 70s, I guess it was, the Virginians. And I played with him a couple years on that. And Carl Dyes, I was talking with him one time, and he talked about a trip going to Baltimore. They would haul watermelons when they weren't doing seafood work. And they weren't going to make it there or something, so they stopped somewhere along the way. I want to say it was on the Potomac, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. And he said he woke up and they stayed on a boat. It was loaded with melons, and he woke up in the middle of the night one time. He was just feeling restless, I guess, and he said he got up off the berth and he put his feet down, and he was ankle deep in water. And I guess he said Jiminy Dast too. I don't know, but he had to get watermelons out of the way to find out where it was coming from. And he and his dad were working hard to keep the boat afloat. Got the engine going, and I don't know if there were pumps or not, but they had lost the tank off the bottom of the boat, and they stuffed it with rags, and he stood on it with his feet, and I don't know where they went to, but they did make it. They didn't lose the boat to get it repaired.
Yeah.
And another thing about Carl Dyes, most people around here know, and probably Larry or one of these other gentlemen can explain more, but he was recently, before he died, he was awarded some medal about his actions during the war.
Well, he was a prince of a man.
Yeah, he did. He told me that it was in the Mediterranean, I believe, and that there was some fighting going on, and there was oil in the water all around, flames, things were on fire, and he said that they were told to leave, to go, and he didn't do that. He drove off the boat, and he went and brought one of the men back,
When he got back, he dove off and went and got another one. And I think it was something like 4 or 5 guys that he saved, brought them back to the boat before they finally did leave. And so anyway, I've been touched by these families, the Paynes, and Jonesy's wife and I, Shirley, we worked together for Southern States for a few years.
Oh, wow. Mhm.
And when they had the grain facility down at the shore in Urbanna. Anyway, I really am, I have been touched by both of those families, and I am very grateful that I got to know them all. And Larry too.
They were delightful people. Carl was he was terrific.
Whitney, you've got the switch to turn us off, I think.